I paid $69 for 100 acres and a fine barn. The land agent said it was a steal. He didn't mention the woman hanging from the rafters. Well now, friends, welcome back to the channel. Settle in and let the fire warm your bones, because we have a story tonight that sinks its teeth into the very marrow of right and wrong. It's a tale about a man who bought a piece of land for less than the price of a good saddle, only to find it came with a debt that couldn't be paid in coin. It's about the kind of trouble that finds a man when he's looking for peace, and the price of standing your ground when the whole world wants to shove you aside. The man's name was Jacob, and his story begins on a day when the sun poured down hot and gold over the Dakota plains. He'd ridden for 3 days to reach this place, this supposed sanctuary. The deed, signed and sealed in a dusty office back in Redemption, felt thin and flimsy in his coat pocket, almost too light to represent 100 acres of earth. The agent, a man with sweat stains under his arms and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, had rushed the sale. A tragedy, he'd muttered. Family's gone. Just want it off the books. Jacob, a man who'd seen enough tragedy to last a lifetime, didn't ask questions. He just wanted a place where the only sounds were the wind and his own heartbeat. The farmhouse was small but sturdy, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the endless grass. But it was the barn that called to him. It was a magnificent structure, built of dark, heavy timber, its shadow stretching long and cool in the afternoon light. It smelled of old hay, leather, and something else. Something metallic and wrong. He slid the massive door open, a groan of protesting wood echoing into the cavernous space. Dust motes danced like frantic sprites in the shafts of light piercing the gloom. And that's when he saw it. A shape, suspended from the central beam. A human shape. He froze, his hand dropping to the Colt at his hip, a reflex from a life he was trying to forget. It was a woman, her head lolled at an impossible angle, her feet dangling a yard above the packed earth floor. The agent's word echoed in his mind. Tragedy. This was more than tragedy. This was a warning. Jacob's world narrowed to the sight before him. The rope, the beam, the still figure. His breath caught in his throat, a sharp, ragged thing. For a moment, the quiet barn felt like a battlefield after the cannons fell silent, a place of profound and terrible finality. He took a step forward, his boots crunching softly on the scattered straw. His eyes, trained to find details in the chaos of a firefight, scanned the scene. The rope was thick, coarse hemp, knotted with grim efficiency. The woman wore a simple, homespun dress, now rumpled and grim. Her hair, a cascade of dark brown, obscured her face. The land agent called it a tragedy, but this felt like a performance, a grotesque piece of theater meant for an audience of one. Jacob! He drew his Bowie knife, its blade a sliver of cold steel in the barn's dim light. He didn't run for the law. He didn't turn his horse and ride away. That wasn't his way. He approached the hanging form not with fear but with a grim sense of duty. He grabbed a nearby crate, dragged it under the woman's feet, the wood scraping a protest against the dirt floor. Climbing atop it, he was close enough to see the details that hadn't been visible from the door. The rope wasn't cinched tight around her neck. It was looped, almost carefully, under her jaw. He reached out, his calloused fingers touching her cheek. It was cool, but not the deep, final cold of death. And then he saw it, the faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. Anger, cold and sharp, surged through him. This wasn't a suicide. This wasn't even just a murder. This was a message, delivered with a cruelty that was both cowardly and profound. He worked the knife's edge against the thick rope, sawing through the fibers with quick, efficient strokes. The final strand snapped, and the woman's full weight fell against him. He staggered but held firm, lowering her gently onto the crate and then to the ground, cradling her head. He pulled the noose away, and saw the raw, red chafe marks on her skin, but also the thick leather harness hidden beneath her dress and collar, a contraption designed to bear her weight and fake a hanging. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to create this horrifying illusion. And you know, I have to pause the story right here for a moment. Because I want you to put yourself in Jacob's boots. Imagine that feeling. You've come seeking solitude, a quiet end to a loud life, and the very first thing you find is an act of unspeakable cruelty. A living, breathing person used as a prop in some twisted warning. What goes through your mind? I think for a lot of folks, the first instinct would be to get back on that horse and not look back. To decide that $69 is too high a price for this kind of darkness. But Jacob didn't. And that, my friends, is where a person's true character is forged, not in the easy times, but in the moments when you're faced with a wrong that demands to be righted. It's what separates a bystander from a protector. Let me know in the comments what you would have done. There's no right or wrong answer, but I love hearing your thoughts. It's what makes our community here so special. Now, back to that barn. Jacob knelt beside the woman, his anger simmering into a protective calm. He brushed the hair from her face. She was young, maybe 20, with a round face that, under different circumstances, would have been framed by a pretty smile. The villains, in their cruelty, might have called her chubby or plain, but Jacob saw only the terror etched into her features, even in unconsciousness. He checked her breathing, it was shallow but steady. He uncorked his canteen and dripped a little water onto her lips. Her eyelids fluttered. They opened, revealing eyes the color of a stormy sky, wide with panic. She gasped, a raw, desperate sound, and tried to scramble away from him, her hands clawing at the dirt floor. "Easy now," Jacob said, his voice low and steady, the same tone he'd once used to calm a spooked horse. "You're safe." "I cut you down," the woman stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked past him, up at the severed rope still dangling from the beam, and a fresh wave of horror washed over her. "He'll be back," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Croft. He'll come back to check." She was looking at Jacob not as a rescuer, but as the next victim. "Croft?" Jacob asked, keeping his voice level. He offered her the canteen. She hesitated, her eyes darting from his face to the open barn door, as if expecting a demon to walk out of the sunlight. Finally, her thirst won out. She took the canteen in trembling hands and drank, the water spilling down her chin. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, some of the wild fear in her eyes receding, replaced by a weary exhaustion. "Silas Croft," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "He works for a man named Barlow. A rich man from back east who thinks he can buy the whole world." Piece by piece she took another shaky breath. "This farm, this was my family's farm. My father built that barn with his own 2 hands." A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Jacob remained silent, letting her speak. He knew this kind of story didn't like to be rushed. Barlow wanted it. He wants all the land along this creek. He offered Pa a pitiful price. When Pa refused, he sent Croft. Her gaze turned distant, lost in a memory that was still raw and bleeding. "Croft and his men, they don't make offers. They make threats. They burned our crops. They poisoned our well. But Pa wouldn't break." Her voice cracked. "So they broke him. They cornered him in town one night. Said he started a fight. It was a lie. They beat him so badly he never woke up." The story hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jacob felt that old, familiar ache in his chest, the one that came from seeing the strong prey upon the weak. "And you?" he asked gently. "What happened to you?" She looked down at her hands. "They threw me off the property. Said it belonged to Barlow now, all legal and proper. I had nowhere to go. But I couldn't leave. Not without what is rightfully mine. They've been trying to sell it, but they scare off every buyer." With that she gestured up at the rope, a shudder racking her body. "They did that to me 3 times now. 3 different buyers. They come, find me, and they run. Croft thinks it's a grand joke. I want to pause again, friends, because what this young woman, we'll learn her name is Ilara, just described is the very definition of resilience. Think about it. She lost her home, her family, and was subjected to a form of psychological torture that would break the strongest of spirits. Yet, she didn't run. She endured that horror, 3 separate times, because she was clinging to something more powerful than fear, justice. She refused to let them win. She refused to let her father's legacy be erased by some bully with a rich man's backing. That kind of strength is a rare and precious thing. If you admire that kind of courage, that refusal to give up no matter the odds, I want you to type the word courage in the comments below. Let's fill this space with a tribute to the spirit of people like Elara, who show us what it truly means to fight back. Alright, let's get back to the story. Jacob absorbed her words, a storm gathering behind his quiet eyes. The cheap price, the hurried sale, the agent's lie about a tragedy, it all clicked into place. He wasn't just a landowner now, he was a participant. He had paid $69 to walk into the middle of a war. You said you couldn't leave without what is rightfully yours, Jacob stated, his tone shifting from gentle to pragmatic. What is it? What are you looking for? Elara's gaze sharpened. For the first time, she looked at him not as a threat or another victim, but as a potential ally. The original deed, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The real one. Signed by the territorial governor himself. Pa always said the land office records could be bought, that a man's true claim was the paper he held in his hand. Before he died, he told me he hid it. Somewhere on this property. It proves this land is ours, not Barlow's. That's what Croft is really after. He knows the deed they filed is a forgery. If I find the true one, their claim collapses. Jacob stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the space. He looked around the vast barn, at the countless nooks and crannies, the haylofts, the stalls, the tack room. It could be anywhere. Then we'd better find it, he said. The simple word, we, changed everything. It was a promise. A declaration. Elara stared up at him, a flicker of hope igniting in her tired eyes. It was a fragile thing, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't entirely alone. The search began. It was a race against a clock they couldn't see, each passing minute bringing the shadow of Silas Croft closer. Jacob was methodical, a man accustomed to searching for hidden dangers. He started with the house, while Elara, her strength slowly returning, guided him. Pa was a clever man, she explained, her voice gaining a bit of its life back. He loved puzzles, riddles. He wouldn't have put it somewhere obvious. They moved through the small, sparsely furnished rooms, the silence punctuated by the sound of floorboards being pried up and furniture being moved. Jacob tapped walls, listening for the hollow sound that betrayed a hidden compartment. He checked behind the hearth, inside the chimney flue, under the loose stones of the foundation. Nothing. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, but the lengthening shadows brought no comfort, only a growing sense of urgency. He loved this barn more than the house, Elara said, her brow furrowed in concentration as they returned to the cavernous structure. He said a man's wealth was in his work, and this was his workshop. They started again, this time amidst the scent of hay and old wood. Jacob climbed into the loft, pitching aside bales of dusty straw while Elara searched the tack room, running her hands over old leather and cold iron. Still nothing. The last rays of sunlight bled through the cracks in the walls. Desperation began to creep in. Maybe he took it with him, Elara murmured, her shoulders slumping. Maybe it's lost forever. Jacob climbed down from the loft, dust clinging to his clothes. He stood in the center of the barn, right below the spot where he had found her. He looked at the massive posts that supported the roof, timbers as thick as a man's chest. His gaze fell on one in particular, the one closest to the main door. It was no different from the others, except for one small detail. A single, dark knot in the wood, at about eye level, seemed just a little too perfect, a little too round. He walked over to it, running his thumb over the spot. It was smooth, unlike the rough grain around it. He pressed it. A faint click echoed in the quiet barn. A section of the wood, no bigger than his hand, loosened. He worked his knife into the seam and pried it open. Inside the hollowed-out cavity lay a small, oilskin-wrapped package. He pulled the package from its hiding place. It was heavier than it looked, dense with importance. He handed it to Ilara, whose hands were shaking again, but this time with anticipation, not fear. She fumbled with the ties, her breath held tight in her chest. She unfolded the oilskin, revealing a thick, parchment document, its edges yellowed with age. At the bottom, above a blob of faded wax, was the bold, flourishing signature of the territorial governor. It was the deed. A wave of relief so powerful it was almost painful washed over Ilara's face. She clutched the document to her chest like a prayer. "He did it," she whispered. "Pa saved us, but their victory was short-lived." A shadow fell across the wide-open barn door. "Well, well," a voice drawled, thick with arrogance and menace. "Look what the cat dragged in. I was wondering when you'd show up." 3 men stood silhouetted against the dying light. The one in the center was tall and broad-shouldered, with a cruel sneer on his face. He wore a fine coat and a holstered pistol that rode high on his hip. Silas Croft had come to check on his handiwork. His eyes flickered from Jacob's stony face to Ilara, and his sneer widened. "Playing house, are we? I have to say, I'm disappointed. I thought you'd have more sense than the last fella." He took a step into the barn, his men fanning out behind him. His gaze fell on the parchment in Ilara's hands. "Ah. And you found the little treasure. I appreciate you doing the hard work for me. Now, be a good girl and hand it over. Then you and your new friend can get on your way. I might even let you keep the $69 your beau paid for my property." Jacob stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Croft and Ilara. He didn't draw his weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply existed, a solid, immovable object. "The lady isn't going anywhere," Jacob said, his voice flat and cold as river stone. "And this isn't your property." Croft let out a short, ugly laugh. "Is that so? You must be new here. Around these parts, property belongs to whoever is strong enough to hold it. And you, friend, don't look nearly strong enough." Croft's men chuckled, a low, menacing sound that echoed the cocking of a hammer. They were confident, used to their threats being enough. But they were looking at Jacob and seeing just another farmer, another drifter to be pushed aside. They didn't see the way his body was balanced, the weight on the balls of his feet, ready to move. They didn't see the calm in his eyes, the deadly stillness that comes not from fear but from familiarity with violence. "Last chance," Croft said, his amusement fading into irritation. He nodded to the man on his right. "Take the paper from the girl. Try not to bruise her too much. Ballo wants his assets intact." The man, a burly thug with a broken nose, started forward, a leering grin on his face. He never made it. In a motion too fast to follow, Jacob closed the distance. It wasn't a wild swing, but a series of precise, brutal movements. A solid strike to the man's throat sent him staggering back, gagging. A swift kick swept his legs out from under him, and he hit the packed earth with a heavy thud. Before the second man could even react, Jacob had spun, grabbing a heavy pitchfork that was leaning against a stall. He didn't brandish it like a weapon, he used it like a tool of obstruction, jamming the handle into the man's gut, doubling him over in a gasp of pain. It all happened in less than 5 seconds. The barn was suddenly silent, save for the gasps of the 2 downed men. Silas Croft stood frozen, his hand halfway to his pistol, his arrogant sneer replaced by a look of pure shock. He had catastrophically misjudged his opponent. Ilara, clutching the deed, watched in wide-eyed awe. She had only known a world of fear and intimidation. To see it so swiftly and completely dismantled was like watching the sun rise after a long night. Jacob dropped the pitchfork, its clatter loud in the tense silence. He turned his full attention to Croft. "You were saying something about strength?" Jacob asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The shock on Croft's face curdled into pure rage. He finally ripped his pistol from its holster, the barrel glinting in the twilight. "You'll regret that, Drifter," he snarled, leveling the gun not at Jacob, but at Ilara. It was a coward's move, and they both knew it. "Drop it," Jacob commanded, his voice hardening into steel. "This is between you and me." Croft laughed, a ragged, unhinged sound. There is no you and me. There's Barlow's property, and there's you, trespassing on it. Now, she gives me the deed, or I put a hole in her. Ilara flinched but held her ground, her fear now mixed with a defiant anger she hadn't known she possessed. She held the deed tighter. Jacob's eyes never left Croft's. He had seen this kind of man before. A bully who was only brave when he held all the cards. The trick was to take the cards away. Go ahead, Jacob said softly. The words were so unexpected that Croft hesitated for a fraction of a second. Go on. Pull the trigger. But know this. The moment you do, this barn becomes your tomb. Because I will walk through your bullet and I will take you apart, piece by piece. The conviction in his voice was absolute. There wasn't a trace of bluff or bravado. It was a simple statement of fact, and in that moment, Croft believed him. That flicker of hesitation was all Jacob needed. He lunged, not at Croft, but to the side, kicking over a large wooden trough filled with rainwater. The trough crashed to the ground, splashing dirty water everywhere and, more importantly, knocking over a lit lantern that sat beside it. The flame hissed out, plunging the barn into near-total darkness. Panic erupted. Croft fired his pistol, the shot a deafening roar in the enclosed space. The muzzle flash illuminated the chaos for a split second, showing Jacob already rolling behind a stack of hay bales. Ilara screamed and dove for cover. The two downed men scrambled to their feet, disoriented. Find him! Croft yelled into the dark, his voice tight with panic. Jacob moved through the blackness with a silent grace, a predator in his element. He knew the layout of this barn now. Croft and his men were intruders. Jacob used the sounds, a kicked bucket, a curse whispered in the dark, to track them. He came up behind one of the thugs, a swift, disabling blow to the back of the knee sending the man down with a cry. The final confrontation was inevitable. Croft, stumbling through the darkness, finally backed into the open space in the center of the barn. Show yourself, you coward, he screamed, waving his pistol wildly. A sliver of moonlight from a high window cut through the gloom, falling on Croft and illuminating the dust mote still dancing in the air. From the shadows, Jacob's voice emerged, calm and clear. You wanted to talk about strength. Real strength isn't threatening women or stealing land from the dead. It's about building things. Like this barn. The man who built it was strong. You're just a parasite. Enraged, Croft fired blindly into the shadows where the voice had come from. The bullet splintered a wooden beam. In that instant, using the muzzle flash as his guide, Jacob moved. He burst from the darkness, a wraith of focused fury. He slammed into Croft with the force of a battering ram. The pistol flew from Croft's hand, skittering across the dirt floor. The two men crashed to the ground, a tangle of limbs and fury. Croft was bigger, heavier, but Jacob was faster, driven by a cold, righteous anger. Fists flew in the dark, the sounds of impact ugly and final. Jacob fought with a brutal efficiency, deflecting Croft's wild swings and landing precise, punishing blows. He trapped Croft's arm, using his own weight against him, and with a sharp twist, there was a sickening crack of bone. Croft screamed, a sound of pure agony that was abruptly cut short as Jacob delivered a final, concussive blow that rendered him unconscious. Jacob rose, breathing heavily, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. He was bruised and battered, a sharp pain radiating from his ribs, but he was standing. He found Ilara, huddled but unharmed, still clutching the precious deed. The sound of approaching horses, fast and heavy, reached them from outside. For a second, Jacob tensed, thinking more of Barlow's men had arrived. But then a voice cut through the night, a voice of authority. This is United States Marshal Evans. Throw down your weapons and come out. Jacob allowed himself a small, grim smile. Before the sun had set, before Croft had even arrived, he'd paid a local boy his last silver dollar to ride hard for the marshal's office in redemption with a simple message: trouble was brewing at the old Miller farm. He had planned for this. He had prepared for victory. The aftermath was quiet and orderly. Marshal Evans, a stern man with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing, took in the scene with a practiced gaze, Croft and his men, groaning and bound, Jacob, bruised but resolute, and Ilara, standing tall with the authentic deed in her hand. Croft, cradling his broken arm, spat threats and curses, promising that his employer, Mr. Barlow, would see them all ruined. The marshal simply ignored him, yanking him to his feet and shoving him toward his deputy. He took the deed from Ilara, his eye scanning the document under the light of a fresh lantern. He grunted, a sound of grim satisfaction. "This is the genuine article, all right. I've seen enough of Barlow's forgeries to know the difference." He handed it back to Ilara with a nod of respect. "This farm is yours, Miss Miller. And Mr. Croft and his associates will be guests of the federal government for a very long time. With what you two can testify, we might just be able to build a case that reaches all the way to Mr. Barlow himself." Justice, it turned out, had finally arrived. As the deputies hauled Croft and his men away, a fragile peace settled over the farm. The air, which had been thick with violence and fear, now felt clean. Ilara stood in the doorway of the barn, looking out at the moonlit fields that were truly hers once more. She turned to Jacob, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jacob just looked at the barn, at the house, at the land stretching out into the darkness. He had come here seeking nothing more than a quiet place to be left alone. Instead, he had found a fight that needed fighting and a person who needed protecting. He had paid $69, a pittance, for a piece of dirt. But in defending it, in standing for something, he had found something he thought he'd lost forever, a sense of purpose. "Just take care of the place," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "Your father would be proud he hadn't bought a farm. He had earned a home. And maybe, just maybe, that was the peace he had been searching for all along." And so, we leave Jacob and Ilara there, under the wide and starry sky, at the beginning of a new chapter. And it brings us to the heart of tonight's story, doesn't it? What is something truly worth? That farm wasn't worth $69. Its real value was in the sweat of the man who built it, the love of the family who lived on it, and the courage of the woman who refused to let it be stolen. Jacob understood that. He realized that the $69 he paid wasn't a purchase price, it was an entry fee. It was the cost of getting involved, of choosing to stand for something when it would have been so much easier to walk away. We all face those moments in our lives. Maybe not as dramatic as a gunfight in a barn, but we face them. Moments where we see an injustice, big or small, and we have a choice: look away, or step in. Jacob's story is a powerful reminder that our true wealth isn't measured by the deeds we own or the money in our pockets. It's measured by our character. It's measured by our willingness to protect the vulnerable, to stand up to the bullies, and to fight for what is right, no matter the cost. That is a fortune that no one can ever take from you. Thank you for joining me by the fire tonight, my friends. Your presence here means the world to me. If this story of courage and justice resonated with you, I want you to do 3 things for me. First, go down to the comments and type the word justice to honor the outcome that Ilara and Jacob fought so hard for. Second, if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We're building a community here, a place for powerful stories that remind us of who we are and what we stand for. And finally, turn on that notification bell so you never miss another tale. Until next time, stand tall, be strong, and may you always know the value of what's truly important.